London, a city often praised as one of the safest and most organized capitals in the world. But behind the glowing lights, busy streets, and polished image, there exists a darker truth, a hidden world where the law is just a word, and the real power belongs to money, fear, and control. Inside the shadowy underground, during the late 1980s, one name slowly began to rise, a name that would shake the foundations of the British underworld, a name that police, media, and criminals whispered with caution, the Clerkenwell Crime Syndicate. But in the streets, they were known by two far more chilling titles: the A-Team, the Addams Family. They weren't famous because they were loud, flashy, or reckless. They became powerful because they were the opposite: cold, calculated, organized. The rise, from small crimes to London domination. Their story didn't begin with million-pound deals or international smuggling networks. It started the way most crime empires do, with small-scale robberies, street fights, petty extortion, and local protection rackets. Back then, London's criminal environment was chaotic. Different ethnic gangs, street crews, and old-school crime families all fought for territory. Everyone had weapons. Everyone had ambition. But only a few had a long-term vision. The Addams Family did. They realized early that street power alone wasn't enough. To rule London, they needed structure, discipline, and business strategy. And slowly, step by step, they built exactly that. They didn't behave like typical street criminals. They behaved like corporate executives. Only their business was organized crime. Every move was professional. Every operation was planned. And every enemy was removed with precision. By the time the 1990s arrived, the A-Team wasn't just another gang. They were becoming a criminal corporation, a business empire built on crime. What made the Clerkenwell Syndicate truly dangerous was their ability to spread into multiple illegal markets at once. High-level drug trafficking, importing cocaine and cannabis, extortion operations across London, money laundering networks, arms trafficking, illegal betting operations, nightclub control, protection rackets, and even investments in legitimate businesses to hide their criminal profits. They weren't dealing in thousands. They were dealing in millions. British media later reported that their total wealth may have reached £150 million to £200 million, making them one of the richest and most organized criminal groups in UK history. While other gangs bragged about their crimes, the Addams Family stayed in the shadows. Quiet, disciplined, and extremely selective about who they trusted. This secrecy was their real weapon: fear, respect, and control. Soon enough, London's underworld began to feel their grip. If someone wanted to run a criminal business, drugs, clubs, betting, or anything illegal, they often had to deal with the A-Team. And dealing with them meant two options: make a deal or disappear. Rival gangs quickly understood the rules. Police struggled to gather evidence because witnesses would vanish, change their story, or refuse to cooperate out of fear. Crime reporters and detectives began calling them Britain's Mafia, not because of their ethnicity, but because of their style, structure, and ruthlessness. This wasn't random violence. This was organized, controlled, and economically motivated crime. The illusion of luxury. With wealth pouring in from every direction, the A-Team adopted a lifestyle far different from typical criminals. They drove luxury cars. They lived in expensive homes. They traveled abroad. They invested in private companies. And they looked less like criminals and more like elite businessmen. But beneath that expensive lifestyle was a world of paranoia, danger, and silent tension. One wrong step, one suspected betrayal, one careless word. That was enough to end a life. The A-Team maintained loyalty through fear and order through absolute control. They were not just rich. They were untouchable, at least for a while, the beginning of the end. By the early 2000s, law enforcement had finally built a strategy against them. Years of surveillance, phone taps, informants, undercover operations, all started closing in. Slowly, one by one, key members were arrested and charged. Their empire didn't collapse overnight, but its iron grip on London began to weaken. Even today, Many believe the syndicate's influence still exists in parts of the city, hidden, quiet, but never completely gone. Because criminal empires don't die easily. They just change shape. And the Clerkenwell Syndicate remains a dark symbol of how a small street crew became one of the richest and most feared mafias in British history. The Clerkenwell Syndicate's greatest strength was simple. Their empire wasn't built on one crime. It was built on dozens. Their operations stretched across multiple illegal industries, each one feeding the next, creating a money machine that almost no other British crime group could compete with. Their criminal portfolio included high-level drug trafficking, international smuggling networks, multi-million-pound extortion operations, sophisticated money laundering systems, arms dealing and weapons distribution, human trafficking routes, illegal bookmaking and underground gambling, protection rackets across London, and a layer of legitimate companies used as fronts to hide their dirty money. This wasn't a gang. This was a criminal corporation. According to multiple underworld reports, investigators believe the syndicate's total wealth reached anywhere between £150 million and £200 million, an amount unheard of for a British organized crime group at the time. A hidden empire in the heart of London. Think about it. In a city like London, where ordinary people struggle with mortgages, rent, transport costs, and day-to-day survival, here was a mafia family living a life straight out of a crime movie. Supercars, luxury mansions, private investments across Europe, shadow businesses hidden behind perfectly legal companies. While the average citizen counted every pound, the A-Team counted profits in the millions. And in a city as powerful as London, money buys everything. Alliances, silence, influence, and fear. Their reach stretched from the streets all the way up to influential circles. Because anyone dealing in illegal trade eventually crossed paths with the Clerkenwell Syndicate. And once you were in their system, you didn't get out easily. Quiet but deadly, the signature style of the A-Team. Most gangs operate loudly, guns, threats, chaos. The A-Team was the opposite. They were silent operators. You wouldn't find them shouting on the streets or boasting about crimes. You'd find them in business-class cars, high-end restaurants, private clubs, wearing leather jackets, sharp shirts, expensive watches, looking more like investors than criminals. They blended into the city like ghosts, present everywhere but visible nowhere. This quiet professionalism is what made them dangerous. They handled crime the way CEOs handle companies. Structured, disciplined, and absolutely controlled. The British Godfathers. It didn't take long before media started giving them a nickname. The UK's Godfather-style crime syndicate. And the comparison wasn't exaggerated. Just like the Italian Mafia, their organization was built on a strict hierarchy. Bosses who made the bigger decisions. Lieutenants who ran key territories. Soldiers who carried out operations. Bookkeepers who managed the financial side. Trusted insiders who handled communication and laundering. Every position filled by someone loyal. Every role designed to keep the empire running smoothly. Their structure allowed them to operate like a shadow government inside London's underworld. Money wasn't power. Fear was. People often assume money is what makes a mafia strong. But with the A-Team, money was only a tool. Their real power was fear. Not loud, dramatic fear, but quiet, calculated fear. The kind that spreads through whispers. The kind that makes witnesses vanish. The kind that makes rivals back down without a fight. The kind that makes entire neighborhoods stay silent. Everyone in the underworld knew if the Clerkenwell Syndicate decided something, it got done. No questions, no noise, no second chances. That fear protected them for decades and helped them build one of the most successful, most organized criminal empires the UK has ever seen. More than a gang, a legacy. Today, even though many key members have been arrested or monitored, the shadow of the A-Team still hangs over London's crime history. Their empire proved that organized crime doesn't always look like gang wars and street chaos. Sometimes it looks like businessmen in suits. Sometimes it looks like a luxury car passing quietly through the night. Sometimes it looks like a company making clean profits. And sometimes The richest criminals are the ones you never even notice. The Clark and Wells Syndicate remains the perfect example. A mafia that didn't just use violence. They used strategy. They used structure. They used fear. And in doing so, they became Britain's richest and most quietly powerful criminal organization. The Clark and Wells Syndicate didn't just rise in London's criminal world. They rewrote the entire crime map of the city. Their approach was brutally simple. Make a deal or disappear. There were no long negotiations, no second chances. If someone refused to cooperate, there were only two outcomes. They left London or they left the world. This was an exaggeration. This was the reality of the A-Team's reign. A new order in the underworld. Before the syndicate's rise, London's underworld was fragmented. Dozens of crews, ethnic gangs, and long-standing crime families control their own districts. South London firms, Islington crews, Turkish Cypriot crime groups, Irish gangs, various independent operators. Everyone had their own networks. Everyone wanted power. But once the Clark and Wells Syndicate began expanding, these groups quickly realized something. They either aligned with the A-Team or they would be crushed. The syndicate didn't need to start wars. Their reputation did the work for them. Most gangs chose partnership over conflict, not because they respected the A-Team, but because they feared them. The mafia tax system of London. In many ways, the A-Team built something similar to a criminal government. Street dealers, distributors, smugglers, anyone making money in the underground markets had to pay them a cut. This wasn't optional. If a group wanted to import drugs into London, they had to inform the syndicate, pay their percentage, follow their rules. If they didn't, their shipment disappeared. Their crew vanished. Their operations collapsed overnight. And no one ever dared to ask who did it. People inside the underworld still say, nothing moved in London without the Addams family knowing. That was their level of control. A silent tax system, a hidden dictatorship, and a criminal economy that revolved around one family. Stability through fear. Surprisingly, the A-Team's dominance brought a strange form of order. Before them, gangs constantly fought for territory, drugs, and influence. Shootings and turf wars were common. After them, things became quieter. Not safer, just controlled. The Clark and Wells Syndicate didn't allow chaos. Chaos was bad for business. So they created a system where every gang had its place. Every territory had its rules. Every deal had its percentage. Every conflict had to be approved or ended by them. It was an underworld monarchy. A criminal empire hidden beneath the surface of London. A police nightmare. For law enforcement, the A-Team became one of the most difficult targets in British history. Why? Because no one talked. Witnesses disappeared. Informants backed out. People refused to testify. In many cases, by the time a case reached court, the witnesses had left the country entirely. The message was clear. Speak against the A-Team, and you won't be around to regret it. Detectives working organized crime units described the syndicate as invisible but everywhere. They couldn't be traced easily. They didn't brag about crimes. They didn't leave trails. They operated like shadows. A presence in every dark corner. The A-Team didn't limit themselves to one area of London. Their influence spread into every corner you'd expect crime to hide. Bars, nightclubs, docks, cargo shipments, construction sites, casinos, street rackets, smuggling routes, import warehouses. If there was money to be made, the A-Team had a hand in it. They didn't show up with guns. They showed up with deals. And if the deal was refused, a gun was never far away. Their strategy was brilliant. Control the spaces. Control the people. Control the money. And this is how they created an empire. A criminal system that operated smoother than many legitimate businesses. A legacy carved in fear. Even today, long after major arrests and investigations, the impact of the Clark and Wells Syndicate still lingers. They changed London's underworld forever. They prove that power doesn't always come from bullets. Sometimes it comes from silence, structure, and precision. They were more than a gang. More than a family. They were a force, a shadow government ruling the darkest corners of one of the world's greatest cities, through fear, discipline, and absolute control. The Clerkenwell Syndicate wasn't just another organized crime group. Their wealth, influence, and discipline turned them into something far more dangerous. A silent power running parallel to London's legitimate world. Their lifestyle alone separated them from ordinary criminals. These men didn't live in cheap hideouts or shabby apartments. They lived like millionaires because they were millionaires. They drove Range Rovers, Mercedes, Bentleys not stolen but purchased in cash. They walked around in tailored designer suits, the kind you'd expect on wealthy businessmen, not gang leaders. They owned luxury apartments, penthouses overlooking the Thames, and secret safe houses scattered across Europe. They invested in foreign businesses, hidden companies, and underground markets. They took private trips, spent heavily in casinos, and quietly purchased properties under fake names. From the outside, they looked glamorous, smooth, classy, and almost untouchable. But behind that polished surface lived a permanent darkness. Inside the A-Team, trust didn't exist. Everyone knew that one wrong step, one suspicious move, one careless conversation could end everything in a second. These weren't criminals who acted out of impulse. They were cold, controlled, and extremely strategic. When an enemy rose up, the ending was always fast and predictable. The person either disappeared or became the next shocking headline in London's newspapers. And that was what made the A-Team terrifying. Their ability to stay calm and clean on the surface, while operating with ruthless precision underneath. Their discipline was iron strong. In public, they appeared like wealthy property investors or nightclub owners. They shook hands with lawyers, businessmen, and even politicians. They spoke softly, dressed sharply, and stayed out of unnecessary violence. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere changed completely. Decisions were made without emotion. Punishments were delivered without hesitation. Loyalty was demanded, not requested, and betrayal was impossible to survive. It was a strict internal order that made them one of the richest and most powerful criminal organizations in UK history. The combination of money, power, and silence turned them into a force no one wanted to cross. Their network ran deep. Illegal profits flowed in from clubs, drugs, financial scams, protection rackets, and international deals. But the money was cleaned, laundered, and reinvested with business-level intelligence. Everything looked legitimate. Everything seemed controlled. Everything felt too perfect. And that's what made them feared. While most gangs fell apart due to internal fights, jealousy, or bad decisions, the Clerkenwell Syndicate thrived because they operated like a corporation, not a street crew. They had hierarchy. They had rules. They had consequences. And most dangerously, they had patience. They didn't lash out instantly. They waited, watched, and then made their move when the target least expected it. Their wealth gave them confidence. Their silence gave them protection. Their discipline gave them longevity. And that is why, for decades, people in the underworld whispered, "These aren't gangsters. These are businessmen with criminal empire. These are the kings of London's shadows." The A-Team built a world where they controlled everything. From docks to clubs, from deals to disputes, from money flow to violence. Yet even with all the glamour, power, and respect, their members live with a constant truth. In this life, nobody is safe. Nobody is trusted. Nobody is permanent. One wrong friend, one hidden enemy, one careless moment. And even the richest man in the room could fall. That was the reality of the Clerkenwell Syndicate, a world wrapped in luxury, powered by fear, and driven by cold ambition, a world where silence was wealth, loyalty was survival, and power was everything. Power is a dangerous thing, and the bigger it becomes, the bigger the downfall that follows. By the early 2000s, the police finally began to close in on the Clerkenwell Syndicate. For years, the A-Team had operated like ghosts, silent, disciplined, and almost untouchable. But the law was evolving, and so were the methods used to hunt them. This time, authorities weren't playing catch-up. They launched full-scale operations. Surveillance teams watching every move. Informants planted deep inside criminal circles. undercover agents blending into clubs and docklands, digital tracking monitoring phones, finances, and secret communications. The walls around the A-team slowly began to tighten. One by one, major players were identified. Police started connecting old murders, extortion networks, drug shipments, and financial crimes that previously looked unrelated. Every clue, every statement, every intercepted message made the picture clearer. Then came the moment the underworld feared, the arrests. Several high-profile members were taken into custody. Long trials followed, with courtrooms packed, the media watching every detail, and London finally seeing shadows turn into human faces. Some witnesses testified, though many disappeared before they reached the stand. Some evidence survived, some didn't. But step by step, the syndicate's iron grip on the city began to loosen. Yet even with all this pressure, one truth remained untouched. The A-team never truly died. It faded, shifted, rearranged itself, but it didn't vanish. Because mafia empires don't collapse like buildings. They dissolve like smoke, changing form, drifting into new corners, hiding in new identities. Names change, faces change, methods evolve. But the system, that remains. Some say the Clerkenwell Syndicate still functions quietly under new leadership. Others believe the old infrastructure, contacts, money routes, international links, is still very much alive, just hidden behind legitimate businesses. Even the police admit that certain unexplained patterns in London's underworld resemble the old A-team style. And in back rooms, bars, and old crime neighborhoods, people still whisper. They never left. They just stopped being visible. The police, the media, and even London's toughest criminals agree on one thing. The Clerkenwell Syndicate was the most wealthy, most organized, and most feared mafia group in UK history. Their empire proved a disturbing truth. That when crime becomes business, when violence becomes strategy, when fear becomes currency, even the world's safest city turns darker. London's shiny streets, tourist lights, and polished image hid a shadow empire running beneath them, a system so structured and disciplined that it resembled a corporation more than a gang. And though the A-team's peak power is gone, its legacy still hangs in the air. Old members are still whispered about. Old grudges still exist. Old networks still move silently through the city. Their downfall didn't erase their influence. It only pushed it deeper underground. Because crime, once organized, doesn't disappear. It adapts. And the story of the Clerkenwell Syndicate is a reminder that power built on fear never really ends. It just hides, waits, and watches. Some say London is safer now. Others say its darkness is simply better managed. But anyone who understands the city's underworld knows the truth. The empire may have fractured, but the foundation is still there. A shadow economy, a silent hierarchy, a network created decades ago that still breathes in the cracks of the city. The A-team may not wear the same faces, may not drive the same cars, may not operate with the same open arrogance, but traces of their blueprint can still be found across London. Their rise was legendary. Their fall was inevitable, but their legacy, that survives, and their story remains a lesson to the world. When crime becomes business, even the brightest city can be swallowed by darkness.